So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Do you have anything to add on that, Rose?
Yeah, I would agree. I think you don't have to know exactly what you want to do, and actually it's probably good to say that you want to keep your options open, especially in the interview. I do know what I want to do, but it might change, and I think you don't have to know straight away, you don't have to know before the interview, and your plans can change in F1 and F2. You don't have to decide your project until you get to F2 actually, so I think keep an open mind. Yeah.
And then someone asked if there's time, if you don't do AFP, to do research projects. So you'll have time to do things like audits and maybe data collection for a bigger study, but I think realistically you'll be knackered from working and you'll struggle to have the time during the day. So you won't have the same protected research time. That's the benefit of AFP, really. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, if you don't get it, there's always scope for you to do extra research work. Then there's nothing to worry about in terms of that, but it's not going to be the same as if you had that protected time every week or that protected 4-month block.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I would agree with that. I think it's nice to have an allocated 4 months where you can really get your teeth into a proper research project. I think it would be difficult to do that. I've just been doing interim F1, and I think you are so tired from working, it's hard to have the energy to do something like that. I mean, many people will manage to do that, of course, and it's not the be all and end all. But I think it is nice to have some dedicated time where you're not doing a clinical job at the same time.
Yeah, and I think the question about whether it'll count against you in future applications, it's never going to count against you if it's not, but it'll always be beneficial if you are showing commitment to specialty. You get what I mean? I think this question was particularly about cardiothoracics, and as Rose said earlier, even if your track isn't a cardiothoracic one, you can always do a cardiothoracic project if the track allows. I think when we applied, this might change, but I remember some hospitals, I think Bolton, their academic blocks were themed. So I think one was anesthetics, but you can always adapt that, so you can have a cardiothoracic anesthetics kind of project, so you can always make it work. They might change those, don't hold me to that, but generally I know in Salford MRI with Insure, and I think Liverpool, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
And I know as well, you don't have to do it in your hospital. So for example, if you at Salford, you can do a project at the Christie, you could do one at Wythenshawe, you could do one at uni. It's very flexible in terms of what you want to do. And yeah, the travel bursaries, as Rose said, I think the £50 one that they give us for everyone, that probably won't count, but then there's no harm putting it. They're not going to hold it against you. I put like almost everything on my application. I think they say on the form as well when we applied is that you only get points for your highest scoring option, but I put multiple ones and I got multiple points for them. I put things like my honours for like my second year PEP and stuff like that, and I got points for that. So put everything you can down and it won't count against you. Yeah. Then
and then I think the next question was about which hospitals offer a PG cert. I think we were talking about this yesterday, and I think the hospitals that offer the education and AFP offer the first module of the PG cert. Again, it's important to check the tracks online on that link that Nashwa posted, because it will give a more detailed idea, but certainly from what we could see, it's the first module is offered in the education AFP. I'm not sure about research and whether you get PG cert in any of those. In terms of whether you have to have an intercalated degree to get an AFP post, I'm not quite sure of the answer to that. I know that, I think it's important that you apply, if you want to do an AFP, I think, anyone could get an AFP regardless of whether you've intercalated. It's all about what experiences you've had, whether you've got significant research experience, or whether you're just really enthusiastic about doing research in the future. I think it's just important. I would say go for it, even if you haven't intercalated. I wouldn't let that hold you back. What do you think, Nashwa? Have you got anything to add to that?
yeah, I agree. I think it's as long as I intercalated, and the benefit of that was mostly that I could have something to talk about in my interviews. So, but we've all done like our APEPs, which are extended projects. So we all do have some projects to talk about, and PEP and things like that. So it's more sort of what you talk about as opposed to what you've actually done. As long as you've gained something from it, and that's what's more important. Don't let competition hold you back from applying, I think that's what I'd say, because you never know. I think there's a few questions on like publications and things, whether you need them. So I didn't have them at the time, but I was working on one, so I put it in my white space questions. So things like that, you can always, whatever you've done, just use it, and don't think that you're any less than anyone else because people have loads and loads that they've done. Like for the next question, I didn't have that much really. I integrated and I had one poster, and then the rest I filled up with my uni presentations and teaching and honours points, and that's how I got an interview. But
yeah, and I was the same, and I think I think most people are. I think it's quite typical to be in that situation. Yeah, so I think have confidence, and you know, if you want to do it, then it's likely that you know you'll get an interview. In terms of a pre-interview score, you don't actually get your scores unless you request the feedback. But I think from what I remember, most people did get an interview. I just think it's just important to put as much as you can, and don't miss anything, and you know, include your honours points, because that can count as well for your score. And in terms of considering when to make your selections and rankings, I think as I've said before, just choose places you're happy to go to, because you could get an offer from any of them. Have you got anything to add to that, Nashwa?
No, yeah, just apply for what you want to, basically, like, because there's a chance that you in Cascade, then you'll then get it. So the way Cascade works is, for example, if someone applied to 2 deaneries and then they get both offers and they reject one, then those offers are then offered to everyone else. So there's a chance that you'll get that offer and then you won't know whether you want it or not. So only apply to things you're actually comfortable, you know, you'll have to take, I'd say, but that's it. And the next question, so we couldn't really say in terms of what's more competitive than the others. I think it's similar to the foundation program. So the teaching hospitals and location-wise, it's going to be more competitive. So the Central Manchester ones and Liverpool are going to be more competitive. I know the Manchester ones all offer all the options, and the Central ones tend to offer research. So they tend to be more competitive, but it's not really something. It's not something that should really hold you back either, I'd say. Just apply for what you want and what you want to do. And then compared to other regions, it's less competitive than London, because I think London have like a cut-off decile thing when you apply initially, but otherwise everywhere else, I'd say it's similar. I mean, we couldn't really comment, but I'd say it's similar, really. And then in terms of other connections, I think with this question, I think it would ask me if it helps to know people at interview. It really wouldn't. I didn't know a single person in my interview, and even if I did, I wouldn't have recognized them. So that doesn't matter. In terms of connections, in terms of projects and things, yes, of course, it's going to help if you know supervisors that you can do work with, but it's so easy to get that connection. All you have to do is email a professor or a supervisor. Everyone tends to be very responsive, especially to medical students being keen. I've not really had a negative experience with that. So just email people if you're interested in their work, and that's how you build that connection. And then having done your degree in Northwest, I don't see why that would really benefit you. As long as wherever you've done your degree, as long as you're aware of what the Northwest has to offer in terms of hospitals and in terms of projects, then that's fine, I'd say. Anything to add?
I don't know. I don't there, but I think we've got a couple more questions on the group chat just now. So the first question was, can we join research projects as medical students? So I think following on from what Nashwa was saying, many consultants are really happy to have medical students who are keen and get them involved in their research work. I know that certainly when I've had supervisors, so I'm really interested in ophthalmology, and when I've approached ophthalmology supervisors, they've often said, oh, well, I've got this case report that needs writing up, or I've got this audit going on at the moment, and you're happy, you know, I'm happy for you to get involved in that. So I think it's just about, you know, building a relationship with the supervisor and asking and sort of looking for opportunities like that. I think that's the way that it's worked for me. I don't know if you've got anything.
Your pet projects as well, they do count as research projects. I mean, I know it's hard, you don't always get good ones, but you can always make them work and do what you can with them. There's always some way you can present that work somewhere, whether it's in like a meeting in the, like for the GP practice. I presented mine in GP practice and then did the RCGP conference, things like that. You can always make the most of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I think just ask at the beginning of a placement, if you're interested in it, just say, I'm really interested in the specialty. Do you have any projects I can work on? And they will have something for you, like always.
Yeah. So I definitely would make the most out of any sort of good connections that you get with supervisors, because they can really sort of help you with that. The next question was, are the clinical stations all emergency scenarios? So from my experience of the interview, they're generally acute scenarios like the ones in the back of the Oxford Handbook, and it will be a case of going through an A to E approach, talking through your A to E approach. So you'll get the information, you'll get blood results, and it's a case of sort of working out what you think is going on in that, how you would sort of treat as you go along, and how you would escalate as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's like urgent scenarios, or even if it does say the ATE has been done and here is the assessment, then you still can go from that and discuss your next steps, your next investigations. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they will tend to be urgent. Also, we can't say because we don't make the interviews, but they always have been. So,
yeah.
So they will be.
And then the next question was, does your research project during AFP have to be based at the hospital you do your AFP at? So I think Nashma mentioned before that, especially in MRI with Insurance Salford, there is some flexibility over where you do your project. So if you're based at MRI and you really want to do a neurosurgery project at Salford, there might be some flexibility for you to do that. I don't know if that's the case in other areas, but I think in MRI with Insurance Salford, that is the case.
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is just email the hospitals and just check. If you can, then they'll let you know. Email the foundation program team. The link I put at the beginning, it's got contact details for the key people at every hospital. So you can just email them and ask and they'll tell you.
Yeah. And then the next question was, would you say it's best to keep an open mind with picking between research, education and leadership during interview, or do they prefer if you know what you want? So I think you need to decide which you'd like to do before you go to the interview, because they will ask you which you'd like to do. That will be one of the questions, or at least that was my experience. So you'll answer that question along a research and education or a leadership sort of framework, depending on which you've chosen, and your application would be suited to one of those three. I think that's what most people tend to do.
Yeah. I would say even for your white space questions, I think if you're not, when they ask you in terms of what you want to do in the future, I think one of the questions is that what you do in the future, you kind of need to know which academic route you want to go down to answer that question. So I would say, I mean, you don't have to commit to it now. So no one's going to like check back and see what you said, but I would say it would be important that you do know which one you want to do.
Yeah. And the next question was, how do you find out more information from different deaneries and the tracks they offer? I think it's mostly on the websites. For each of the deaneries will have sort of a table of which tracks there are. And when you're ranking the trusts, you rank the tracks and the jobs as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
The next, yeah.
Yeah, so for the different deaneries, just go on the different websites and they all have the tracks on there, and then you'll have to see. And then you can always email them and ask more information about it or speak to people. I think with us, if you want to do Salford or Liverpool, then we'll have to answer questions on that. But yeah, that's the best thing. And so I was just reading the Cascade question. So yes, it is that if you could be offered a position that you're ranked higher later, but you're only offered one post. If that makes sense. So if you're offered in Cascade one post, even if it was your lower one, if you reject that, you won't be offered a higher one. If that makes sense. So you're only offered the first post that is available to you. If that makes sense. So what happens is, for example, if you put down all the AFP tracks and then someone's offered Bolton and they reject it, then you could be offered Bolton in the next one. And then if you reject that Bolton one, then someone else will get offered that Bolton track, if that makes sense. But once you offer that bulletin track and then you reject it, you won't be offered anymore, basically. You'll be taken out of that process, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Just to interject quickly then, so with regards to this cascading, that's only done then, obviously, if you don't get your offers from the ones you applied to, or?
No, so they're from the ones you applied to. So it's basically, if you're not offered on the 13th of January, you're basically put on a reserve list.
Right, okay.
The offers that you've put down are available because other people have rejected them, then you'll be offered them.
Yes, okay, that makes sense. So it's like clearing, basically.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Okay. Cheers.
So then if you put fewer options, you're less likely to get something in cascade, but then you might not get what you want, basically. Does that make sense?
And then there's a question about Liverpool. So have you heard about any Liverpool AFP doctors doing research with the Tropical Medicine School in Liverpool? I actually haven't heard about anyone doing that, but I know that they are very, at Liverpool, they seem very open to doing whatever you want. And I'm sure at the Tropical Medicine School, they would definitely be happy to have AFP. On the Liverpool website, they do actually have vague sort of project areas which you can go into. So I think it would be worth checking there. But there is, if you send an email to the head of the AFP in Liverpool, she's very responsive and I'm sure she would be able to help you if it doesn't answer your question.
And then for the interview scoring, so what they tend to do is each panelist will mark you out of 25. So if there's 2 panelists, the station will be out of 50, and they just add all the scores up together, and then they add it to your decile, and then they score everyone.
So they interview a lot more people than there are places. From my memory, I think there were about 100 and something people who were interviewed, and there are 56 places in the Northwest.
Yeah, there's about, I think it's 140 interviews. So they give you your rank at the end of it where you rank. I think it's out of 141, 56. But bear in mind, not everyone's applied to all of them. Some people only applied to like 3 or 4 tracks. But yeah.
I'll just ask some filler questions of my own whilst we're waiting for any more questions to come through. I was just wondering, with regards to the project that you guys will do, because obviously you're both doing research then, are you expected to do something that, I don't know, from the perspective of a medical student might seem quite advanced, or would it be something that perhaps we might do in our later years of medical school? So an audit of a ward or an audit of a surgeon's patient lists, for example, or would you be expected to take it a bit further and do some bigger research projects?
So I think Rose would answer better because she sorted a project out already, but it's a 9 to 5 4-month project, so it's quite a significant amount of time. I think what someone said to me once, it's similar to your intercalation projects if you've done that, or like a master's level project. So it will be much more significant than you can do as a medical student, and it should be a bit of a higher level as well because you are a doctor now.
Yeah, I think it's, there's a lot of flexibility with what you do, whether it be sort of lab-based or clinical. But I think, yeah, it should be a significant piece of work for 4 months of work, and similar to what you'd expect from a dissertation, I think.
And is that likely to be, is it always going to be one project, or would it be, a few smaller projects perhaps, or?
I think it depends. I haven't actually sorted out exactly what my project will be yet, but I think I would hope to do maybe a bigger project and maybe an audit as well. And also one thing to think about is it doesn't have to just be that 4-month block. So if you do establish a supervisor early, you can be doing work with them in your F1 year as well as your F2 year. If that's what you want to do.
No, thank you. It makes sense. I think we've just got 2 more questions. Guys, if you've got any more questions, just please put them in the chat before we wrap up. But sorry, I'll hand back to you.
Do you apply for your own funding and ethics by the university? I'm not sure entirely about funding, but I know that I've had to apply for an honorary clinical fellowship at Liverpool. So that will allow me to have contact with the university. I'm not sure whether that will give me funding. I think you have to do your own application, but you will have a link to a university through a honorary clinical fellowship. Do you, Nashua, do you know what your plans
supervisor
are?
at the time would be better to help you with that, because whatever they do, then they'll be able to support you. I mean, you can always apply for grants and things. It depends what kind of research you're doing, because you can do like lab-based projects with the university will provide your funding, or clinical ones with hospital provide your funding. If you have a project in mind or a supervisor in mind, or someone that you know does AFP projects that you're interested in, then I'd email them and ask, because they'll guide you near the time in terms of what you need to do.
And the last question was, have you heard of anyone doing a lab-based project, or is it mainly clinical? I actually haven't heard of anyone doing a lab-based project, but I hope to do one. So I'm not entirely sure. I think it depends on your supervisor and your plans. But I think you can do either.
Yeah, you can do either. The people I emailed before my interview are both professors in the lab, and they are very used to having AFP like people. So you can do either, whichever you want.
And then one drawback of the AFP is having less clinical time to achieve clinical competencies. How difficult is this to achieve? I think this is definitely something very important to consider, because, and especially to mention in the interview, you know, if they ask you what are the drawbacks of doing an AFP, you will have less time to complete your competencies. However, you know, you need to make sure that you can do that. And I think it's just important to recognise that, and hit the ground running when you start, and get everything signed off early and in plenty of time.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's part of the reason they have the clinical stations in the AFP interviews across the deaneries, is to make sure you do have that baseline of clinical competence when you start. I think if you're organised, it should be fine. It doesn't really cause people that many issues. It'll be fine. Just make sure that you're organised. And I would mention in the interview as well that you are aware of this and that you are good with time management and you can handle that well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Just give it a few more minutes then. If any questions to trickle in. Whilst we're doing that, we've got another event coming up, which is basically the same format as this one, but this time centered on the London AFP. So I'll just link that in the chat below. But yeah, please just click interested, etc., just to keep up with that. I don't think we've got any more questions coming in. So thank you very much, both Rose and Nashwa, or should I say Drs. Herbert and Ismail. Sorry. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming. As I said, we'll email all of you guys a feedback form. And once you fill that out, Rose and Nashwa have said they're happy for us to give you the slides. So we'll do that as well as a certificate as well. Okay. So there's the link for the London event. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming. Please follow us on Facebook to keep up with the upcoming events as well.
Okay, thank you everyone. Good luck with your applications.
Just email if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer.
Yeah. Okay.